Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The second part of our conversation with Jovan Buha, we discuss what the Lakers might be able to get for Russell Westbrook. Is a good trade a realistic possibility? That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. We get this thing up bright and early for you. No matter how you get your podcasts, where you get your podcasts, never behind a paywall, always free for you. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to get the podcast a little early if you both want to hear it before everyone else. It gets the audio-only product. And if you want to see this. So we are excited today to finish our conversation with Jovan Buha. Welcome back, Jovan.
Thanks for having me. Russ, the elephant in the room, he just scrubbed his Instagram of all other than his avatar, which still has him in a Lakers 0. What to do with him moving forward and how best to process this? Like what are you hearing in terms of, I guess, viability with not just viability with trades, but viability with trades that might actually help the Lakers as opposed to just getting rid of Russ? Because to me, at least, you can disagree. They're two separate questions.
Yeah. I think the Lakers have to trade Russ. I don't think there's any way that they can bring him back.
We actually talked about this. He's like, you don't see any possible, or at least realistic avenue.
I think he comes
back and it's better this year than last year. Or next
no,
year
I think it's you trade him or you send him home. I don't think stretching him, it becomes a whole other issue where it's just too much money on your cap. I actually think Russ can have more value to certain teams depending on their goals. Like, I think if you're a tanking team and you just want a fat expiring contract and you're trying to shed some money, some longer, like that's where, I don't think the Indiana trade is going to happen, but that's where like the Indiana trade to me kind of satisfies.
And who's in that for people unfamiliar?
Yeah,
with it?
so that's like the base of it is Malcolm Brogdon and Buddy Hield for Russ, and maybe Lakers throwing a pick or protected pick or something, and like you kind of haggle over the final details of that, but that's kind of the core of the trade. And Indiana is in the process of kind of going through their own sort of rebuild and turning the keys over to Tyrese Haliburton and Chris Duarte and Miles Turner. And then, so I think they're looking at that as we're shedding 3 years of Malcolm Brogdon and 2 years of Buddy Hield for 1 year of Russell Westbrook. And Indiana has historically never really tanked. If you go through, go to Basketball Reference, look at Indiana year by year, there aren't many years they've won like 20 something games. They've always kind of been like low 30s at a minimum, because it's kind of them and Utah are like the two teams that they always tried to, like, they like being mediocre at a minimum, where it's like, we're going to put at least like a competitive team, a product out there. Even if we're not a contender, we're at least going to be competitive. So Indiana, I mean, you could either keep Russ, and I mean, that has its challenge, but I think Russ has kind of shown, like, for an Eastern, I think in the East, Russ can still be like, Russ and maybe help a team be like a at least get into play-in. But, or you can, buy him out and sort of, go that route. But for Lakers, I think that to me is the best trade for the Lakers, because Malcolm Brogdon is a starting level point guard, and Buddy Hield, obviously, they had the flirtation with him last offseason. And I think you're getting two starting level players for Russ, two players that are better shooters, both can play make a bit, defensively, not great, but Russ wasn't great defensively. So I think if I'm the Lakers, I guess in terms of what I'm looking for in a Russ deal, I'm looking to get multiple rotation, like almost the reverse of the Washington trade. I'm looking to get multiple guys I can rely on. Ideally, a point guard in there, because I think it's going to be hard to find a point guard Like I mentioned earlier, you can get a veteran minimum point guard, but like you're not going to get a Malcolm Brogdon for the taxpayer MLE or a vet minimum contract. So ideally getting some type of starting level point guard back to replace Russ, but then also another player or two. So that's what I'd be looking for. But
right.
Yeah,
the question becomes like, I mean, look, and beyond you think an AD and LeBron core makes people nervous from an injury standpoint, adding Malcolm Brogdon to, but look, we are in a beggars can't be choosers kind of situation when it comes to Russ. Is that a good enough trade to add draft picks? Because I think that's the crux of this. It's like, yeah, I would trade Russell Westbrook for Kelly Oubre and Gordon Hayward or whatever, and I would trade him for Brogdon and Hield. I'd do that in a heartbeat. The bigger question is,
and I don't particularly care about the salary that they're taking back.
The Lakers
can
trade
deals.
those guys down the road. They have to get over that idea.
I think Brogdon and Hield are very tradable.
And also, I mean, it's Rob Pelinka's job to be creative. Like other GMs around the league take on longer deals. That's part of the job description.
Right. It's just they have shown that they hamstring themselves by having so little salary that on this team, and it cuts off as many options as it creates to have cap space. But do you think that is a good enough deal where if Indiana says, we'll give you 2 useful players, but you got to give us, one or both of those first round picks, is that too high a price?
It's tough. I think it's a delicate balance. Like, to me, I just think, what are you doing with LeBron and AD if you're not going all in? And that's why, like, even at this trade deadline, I was a proponent of them throwing in their 2027 pick if that ultimately got a Russ deal or a THT deal done. Now, I guess in retrospect, that would have been a disaster because they just weren't good enough. And I don't see any trade that was out there, that Knicks trade. I don't think that would have gotten them. I mean, maybe it gets them into the play-in, but like still, I don't. This year's team wasn't going to do anything. But I think, again, like it's like the Lakers have this kind of weird. They're on this weird timeline where I think you might only have 1 year left of LeBron and AD. You might have 2 years left, and if that's the case, I think you can't do half measures where it's either like we're going all in on trying to build the best team possible over the next year or two, or we have to start considering unloading one or both guys and starting a rebuild of some kind, or maybe, trading AD for a younger star in a different situation and maybe kind of resetting our timeline. But I think to kind of be like, we want to come, and that was kind of, it almost was like what they were doing this season where it's like, yeah, we want to compete, but we need to keep our future picks. And like, I get it. I understand that the value of first round picks. I'm not one of those people that says first round picks aren't valuable, but you only get so many shots at a championship. And for all we know, with the Lakers' recent history, like this could be their best shot. Like next season could be their best shot at a title for the decade. There's no guarantee that, like LeBron's only playing a few more years. AD, who knows? Like, with his injury history. So there's no, like, sure, I'm sure they'll get another star later in the decade, but like you only get so many shots at a championship. Right. And for me, if you have the opportunity to improve your roster, which to me, going from Russell Westbrook to Brogdon and Hield would be a huge jump, in my opinion.
No, from a talent standpoint, there's no question.
And just fit. And like, I think Brogdon, because I think the other thing, like, to me, Dallas is a really good example of what the Lakers should try to aspire toward, of like Dallas winning games without Luka. And we could get into Utah, and like that's a whole other thing of Utah's issues. But like, I mean, Dallas on paper like doesn't have a second star, and Jalen Brunson has kind of become that. But like, they have an identity without Luka where they can still win games and remain competitive without him. You've also seen that a bit with the Clippers without Kawhi and PG. Like the Lakers need to find that, and that gets into our previous conversation with LeBron and AD and their health. Like, and that's why I think the Lakers thought maybe Russ could do some of that stuff. Clearly couldn't, but my kind of secondary goal for this year's roster construction would be, how can we cultivate an identity where if LeBron is out, we have identity A. If AD is out, we have identity B. If both of them are out, we have identity C. And obviously you don't want identity C, but you need to be competitive with that. You can't be, like this past season.
The final piece of that, though, in terms of, and you mentioned this on Thursday's show, that dictates some of that identity is the coach. And so that's the one thing we haven't talked about. We'll do it one more segment with Jovan Buha. We'll get to that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar. Eating smart, but also enjoying the process of eating smart. It's never tasted better. You can actually treat yourself without feeling guilty with Built Bar. If you've not tried the puffs yet, you are missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bar. They are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. Never heard of such a thing before, but the scientists over at Built Bar, I assume they're scientists. I'm not even really sure what they do, but they've come up with something incredible like this, fluffy, marshmallowy, and not just a protein bar. It's a treat covered in 100% real chocolate with really cool flavors like cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. They're all awesome. And again, covered in 100% real chocolate. And unlike a typical candy bar, which is like 200 to 300 calories of just empty nonsense, most Built Bars are just 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, but 17 grams of protein. And that's actually what you want in your body. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKED15, 15% off at built.com.
Okay, so Jovan, you've gone dark a couple times over the course of our time together. Where do you think they turn for a coach? Are they going to be able to get the type of talent that they want, at least that they claim to want? I do have some concerns that the best coaching candidates out there might not be as attracted to this job as people would have thought a few years ago.
Yeah, I think just being the Lakers and again having LeBron and AD, like I think you can have probably a conversation with anybody, but I think the Lakers have to come correct with the years and the money. I think they have to learn from their previous coaching search and the way that they fumbled. I think imagine Ty Lue with this team. Imagine Monty Williams with this team. And that's no disrespect toward Frank Vogel. He won them a championship. Ty Lue has not won a championship with the Clippers. Monty Williams might win a championship with the Suns, but has not yet won one. So like it's hard to say the Frank Vogel hiring was a miss, but I think overall over the last kind of 3-year sample, you would probably say Ty Lue and Monty Williams are overall better coaches.
But the process, even if the result was okay, the process was wrong.
And even with Frank, not only the coaching search, but subsequently, the extension process of giving him a 1-year extension, and clearly they weren't very confident. And I guess maybe they were proven right to some extent, although I think they also set him up for failure with this roster build.
They went out of their way to be right.
Yeah. But I would just say, like, you're the Lakers, and I think they need to start valuing coaching more than they have in I think the Genie Bus era, and really even going beyond that, like since Phil, I think they have not really valued coaching. My concern is that even if they do get kind of their pick of the litter, so to speak, like I don't really love the current coaching market. Like, there's always like the under, the kind of up and coming assistant coaches and sort of the underrated guys around the league. But I don't think the Lakers are going to hire one of those. Like nothing about the Lakers history suggests that they're going to hire some like random assistant coach. And if you heard what Rob Pelinka said at his exit interview, he was basically talking about gravitas, and we want someone who could command the locker room and get respect from the players. And he had he was like, oh, well, this isn't a shot at Frank, but like it clearly was like,
right.
It was clear that the players had started to tune out Frank, and he no longer had that respect of the locker room. But I think, that to me sounded a lot like a Doc Rivers or a Mark Jackson. And that is not a direction personally I would go. I mean, look, Doc might blow a 3-0 lead, first one in NBA history.
Oh my God. Have you seen, by the way, there's a clip circulating on Twitter now where Doc is explaining away some of these 3-1 leads that he's blown. And one of them is, the T-Mac team from 2003, where I think it was when McGrady made that guarantee. Yeah, against the Pistons. And he's like, I'm paraphrasing, but barely. I dare you to look at that roster right now. He's like, if you looked at that roster, you might say like, that was a great coaching job, which by the way, he's not wrong. Like the starting lineup was like T-Mac, Andrew DeClerc, like Drew Gooden, but like
I'm not here for your Andrew DeClerc slander, Andy.
But at the same time, it's like, who says that?
Yeah.
Like, who says, like, look at these bums that I coached? And then he's like, and then Chris Paul got hurt in one of them. Like,
I will say, I like Frank
insane
Vogel.
what
Frank
he was
Vogel
doing.
almost said that this year by the
Yes,
end
he
of it.
did.
At least he was flirting with that.
But in terms of, I don't even want to say outside the box options, but maybe like outside the box by Laker standards. Do you think somebody like a Sam Cassell, who's been an assistant for a long time, he won titles as a player, he is really well respected among peers, he's somebody that could age into the role if, the Lakers ever were interested in keeping a coach for longer than 3 years, because he's still, I think, like 45 or something like that. Do you think somebody like him, even they would be open-minded towards, or somebody of kind of that profile?
Yeah, I think it has to, I think there's probably a former player element there where it has to be someone who has the let's be like, LeBron and AD have to be on board with whoever they hire. And I think for me, the top candidate has to be Nick Nurse. And, obviously he's under contract, but there is a clutch connection. It would have to be a Doc Rivers to the Clippers situation where they give up a pick, and that might be too much to stomach. I think Nick Nurse is a top 3 to 5
throw
coach.
in Russ?
Yeah,
we'll give you the pick and Westbrook.
Look, they like THT. Throw it THT in a first round pick for
sure.
Nick Nurse.
Do you actually think that's viable? Like even a live-ish option?
Why would he do that?
I wouldn't underplay the clutch connection,
because to me that is a great use of first-round picks. I would much rather use a first-round pick towards getting a coach like Nick Nurse than just using it as sweetener for Russ. I think it's a way better use of of draft capital.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, and look, I love Toronto, so this is not meant like it probably is my favorite NBA city to visit, and I'm a big Drake fan, so like this is no slight at Toronto, but I do think you've heard the Masai, Knicks or Wizards, and then I think like with Nick Nurse, it is like sort of like the Sam Presti situation where it's like he's done a lot for Sam Presti's basically done everything he can at OKC other than win a championship, and he could be looking for the next challenge of what bigger the Bulls or the Lakers or whatever that I can take over and lead this team to a championship. I feel like with Nick Nurse, like he's already won the championship in Toronto, but I do think the Lakers. I think the people are underselling kind of the whole Lakers situation of just wow, it's the Lakers. Like, I know it might not be what it was even 5 years ago, but I still think there are people who are going to look at this job and be like, I can coach the Lakers. And
you've got me really rolling here, because now I am in my head using THT and one pick to get Nick Nurse, and now I'm just throwing in the other pick to get Sam Presti. We're really rolling here.
That's how, yeah.
Drake is sitting courtside. This whole thing's working out great now.
I am suddenly very excited about where the Lakers are going.
I would say Nick Nurse. Otherwise, I think Quin Snyder's gotten a bad rap because a couple of years ago, Quin Snyder was revered, very highly, and they've obviously had a couple collapses. I think people are not properly factoring in like how sensitive the Rudy Gobert situation is. In like, people have talked about him not being able to adjust, but I think Rudy Gobert to me is someone that if you bench him down the stretch, last 5 to 7 minutes of a critical playoff game, like that is someone whose confidence is going to be shook, and someone who would take that sensitively. And I think Quin Snyder has kind of had his hands tied with the adjustments he can really make. Now, I'm not saying he's done a great job, but I do think that he's someone that with a different roster, I think, given LeBron and AD, I would be interested to see what he could do there. I think Mike Brown, a retread.
That's a really interesting name. Yeah.
Someone who has been with Golden State since 2016 and has won a couple championships, been in the finals multiple times, learned to understand. Like the thing with Mike Brown was, defensively coming from the pop system, has a very strong defensive base, but has now been with one of the greatest offensive minds.
He is a straight up defensive genius. Like he really is that good.
And now learning from Steve Kerr and taking some of those, offensive principles, I think Mike Brown is an interesting guy. I think Doc is, I mean, look, if they blow a 3-0 lead, like I don't see how you can hire Doc, but Doc.
There's reasons, Jovan.
I can see how they.
Have you seen that roster?
Apparently, Mark Jackson's getting buzz. Like I think I'm gonna stay away from that one, but just kind of look back on some of the things that were reported coming out of the Golden State situation. And I think that will give you some pause on that.
All right. Well, there's going to be so much more that happens over the course of this offseason. We would love, we'll give you a couple more weeks to rest and look even more rejuvenated than you did at the end of the season. Again, this was Jovan when it was over. This is Jovan now. He's really improving. But thanks so much for coming on, giving us 2 days worth of time. We really appreciate it.
Read his work at The Athletic, people. It's great. One of the best people out there covering the Lakers. So definitely check it out. Subscribe if you are not already.
Thank you, guys.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net, your #1 source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including the NBA playoffs, which are going on right now, and also baseball, which is in full swing right now. And because the MLB season is still pretty early, you can check out the previews they have for the AL and NL and get a lot of really good info about where to put your money. For example, understandably, big on the Dodgers over at BetOnline, but they also like the Padres, the Giants. They find the NL West pretty intriguing for the long haul. So some really good advice over there. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the games start.
Okay, well, I am excited now, Andy, because I am fully invested in this thing that Jovan guaranteed. He guaranteed it. Go back and watch that segment again. He guaranteed it. Nick Nurse, Sam Presti. I feel bad for Rob Pelinka, but sorry, you're out. This brain trust is in, and you know what? I bet we could even get Presti to acquire Russ in a sweetheart deal and then come and join the Lakers, similar to how people thought Jerry West rigged the whole thing for the Lakers with the Memphis deal a bunch of years ago. This is going to work out great.
Yeah, plus Pelinka gets to be the hottest man in Oklahoma City, so it works out really well for everyone.
Oh, in your scenario, they actually trade the GMs. I like that even more.
I mean, you got to make this worth the Thunder's while. They're not just getting a pick; they're getting a seasoned, title-winning general manager.
Strangest version of wife swap ever.
Look, for all of Sam Presti's genius, how many titles does that guy have? As many as you and me. None.
Okay, aggregators, calm down. That is not actually what Jovan said was going to happen. He didn't squash the idea of Nick Nurse as much as I would have expected, and in that sense, I'm now more excited.
I was stunned, frankly, by how live he thought this was an option.
Right. The Quin Snyder thing is just interesting because, when you talk about Doc Rivers or Quin Snyder or anybody like that, less so Nurse because his team's not favored.
His team's actually doing exceptionally well.
Right.
Under the circumstances, they've been great.
You would be taking a guy who was coming off of disappointment, being fired for failure in one sense or another, which is always interesting. It's not like, or I guess trading for a guy who the other organization wants to let go if they weren't planning on. You get my point. And so it's not like they'd be going and getting the best free agent candidate with no, at the peak of their perception. I'm much more interested in Snyder than I am Doc, but I'm just as interested in, like you mentioned, Sam Cassell or kicking the tires.
Have you seen the rosters I dealt with, Brian?
Alex Jensen, who is Quin Snyder's
What would you
assistant.
do with the clerk?
He wasn't very good, in fairness to Doc. I'm just as intrigued by that as I would be certainly Mark Jackson or Doc Rivers. Maybe I'd put Quinn a tick ahead of that, but in terms of your recycled guys, give me Mike Brown before you give me Doc Rivers, please.
Yeah, Mike Brown would be really fascinating just because you and I covered him while he was the coach of the Lakers, and we both loved him as a person. He is
wonderful guy. Wonderful guy.
Terrific person for better and worse. I remember when they hired Mike Brown, it was the lockout offseason. So the team had no access to any of its players. The only person they had access to was Mike Brown. And they brought in some of the local media that covered the team to this lunch with Mike Brown. And we were both among them. And the moment where I knew that Mike Brown was both going to be exceptionally just well prepped and well thought out for this job and the totally wrong guy for the job is in talking with us about his process. He took out these 3 thick 3-ring binders. One of them labeled offense, one of them labeled defense, and the other practice. And this was for a super veteran-heavy, championship-tested team. And I was just like, this ain't going to work.
No, but I'll tell you what, though. Those are the binders that got him hired. I mean, if people remember the stories, like he came into with Jim Buss with those binders, and Jim Buss was just bowled over by that. I find him interesting.
But I want to see what he's learned since
that's the thing. It's like Mike Brown is, I'm trying to look up how old he is.
He's under 50.
He's 52.
52.
So
okay.
So he's not old, but I mean,
not at all.
He's younger than you. And so significantly.
Yeah.
And he's a retread in the sense that this would be his third head coaching gig. But like you say, guys evolve, they learn. He's not so old that you would expect him to be baked into his philosophies or positions on anything. And, obviously, if he's got some currency with LeBron and, that relationship is good and all of that, I just think it'd be an interesting place for them to go. And I find him as a quote unquote retread much more interesting than Doc.
Well, I remember asking somebody who covered the Warriors a couple of years ago, and I don't remember how this came up, but we ended up talking about Mike Brown, and I asked this person what they thought of Mike Brown as a head coaching candidate. I wasn't even specifically talking about the Lakers. I was just talking about in general, and this person said that they thought he had really learned a lot about what he specifically did wrong with the Lakers, because like I said, I mean, that was just too experienced a team to be running 2 to 3 hour practices daily and stuff like, and this was a group that in a lot of respects knew as much or more than him. And he didn't have the force of personality at the time. And maybe he does now, maybe he knows how to offset it better. But he was a guy that was going to be too easy for the players to run roughshod over him, which they really did. But, that's like a decade removed from where we are now. And this person who covered the Warriors said they thought Mike Brown was going to be very well prepared for that next opportunity. And like we said with Jovan, that dude, I mean, I remember saying this when they let Mike Brown go. I didn't think he was the right guy to be the head coach of the Lakers. I wasn't sure if he was the right guy to be the head coach of anyone, but I'd want that dude on my staff in a heart. And I would pay him big assistant money to have him on my staff.
And they have there. And
he's that good.
They made sure to keep him around.
He's that good.
And so, he's a guy you'd want to have some offensive talent around and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully, the concept of retreads, again, not to make this conversation just about Mike Brown. It's some guys, Frank Vogel was a retread who I think learned from Orlando to LA. And sometimes those guys aren't better. You see it in sports, football, basketball, whatever. And sometimes they learn a lot. And I think Mike Brown is in that sweet spot from an age standpoint where you are old enough to and experienced enough to understand what works and what doesn't work, but not so old that you're rigid. You're still intellectually curious. You're still willing to adjust to the times and flexible and open. And I think that is what they really need from their next coach. Oh, go ahead. And then
I was going to say real quick, I brought up someone like Sam Cassell. I'm very intrigued by the prospect of him because I just feel like he checks a lot of different boxes, but also if he actually is good as a head coach, he is young enough that he could theoretically be around for a while. So I just hope that they are open to recruits or, candidates that aren't just the biggest,
less of a star,
names.
less of a star than Doc. Sam Cassell, by the way, same age as Mike Brown.
Right. Or just the idea that they're concerned about winning the press conference.
Absolutely.
I'm not even sure they can win this press conference.
No, and I'm not sure Doc wins it in the way that they think it will.
No, he does not.
Yeah, Sam Cassell is actually slightly older than Mike Brown. Interesting note there. Gives you an idea of how young Mike Brown was when he got his first job. All right. Thanks again to Jovan Buha of The Athletic. As Andy mentioned, get out there, subscribe, read his stuff, follow him on Twitter and wherever else you can find Jovan on social media. We will be back next week. Kevin Arnovitz is going to join us, and we're trying to line up a bunch of other really good guests. These conversations I think are really great. Keep suggesting people that you want to see on the show, and we will keep finding as many good guests as we can. Everybody have a great weekend.